Video games have long excelled at transporting us to bleak, depressing worlds for us to linger and explore cautiously. These digital landscapes of horror and torment, it's become mainstream. Anyone can lose themselves in the suffocating loneliness of Silent Hill 2, or the threatening, crumbling kingdoms of From Software games. It's become an entire school of design to craft these environments to make the player and the characters within feel uncherished and abandoned. There are countless games that explore feelings of loss and helplessness within their maps and narratives, but there's only been one that's really been fidgeting within me recently. Something that's flown under the radar of most people that has perfectly nailed the sense of being alone in a video game, left to the wayside, sidelined. It's a Unity game called 0_Abyssal Somewhere. I promise this is not the kind of indie horror slop you may have been thinking of. This game has been made with extraordinary care. It feels like playing a creepypasta game come to life. I don't think there's a game out there that has made me feel so much paralyzing lonesomeness, so much external pressure and abandonment as this one, and seeing just a few seconds of footage might convince you the same. So little people know about this game, but once you've played it, you might not feel like the same person after you gaze into the abyss. What I aim to do here is to give a thorough, deep dive and explanation of this game and its developer, from top to bottom, and examine its wealth of biblical references and try and pick apart just exactly where this somewhere takes place. And if that sounds like a good time, then I strongly suggest you give those tried and true like and subscription buttons a little click, and perhaps even check out my Patreon page if you're interested in exclusive videos not found anywhere else. Thank you to the Jawcoin and VideoFund tier patrons. You're the ones that keep this channel alive and running. Let's get lonely. Usually I like to give grand sweeping statements about the current year the game I'm talking about was developed in and what the developers were doing up until that point, but I'm not really afforded that luxury here. The game's creator is someone by the name of No Noise, and they're almost a complete mystery. All we know is that their online activity under that name cropped up in 2018, and that they're from Spain. That's it. I don't have a grand introduction to set the stage or some of their earlier works. They just showed up one day and started posting screenshots leading up to the release of this game. Let's take a look at that itch.io page. 0_Abyssal Somewhere. The name is formatted like it's a custom map in a Source Engine game, if that makes any sense. An abyss is a kind of hole or chasm noted for exceptional size and feeling endless. You've probably heard of that one Nietzsche quote about staring into the abyss and it staring back, right? The abyss is synonymous with our darker halves and the things we don't care to mention to others, but also that stinging feeling of emptiness and longing, a hole that can overlap you and make you feel hollow. That somewhere part illustrates that this abyss apparently exists somewhere in some nondescript location that no one knows about, or no one cares enough to know. Facing others' shades, strolling through an abyssal place. The memories, pains, and regrets of the old sunken realm. If that isn't the description of a forlorn, forgotten place steeped in pain and loss, then I don't know what is. Even the cover is profoundly lonely, an obscured figure wandering in a hazy, smudged black and white environment, with the game's title appearing like a tattoo on this stained surface. It all feels so disorienting and hazy, like a kind of emotional dredge when you've been searching for someone or something for a significant period of time, only to realize that the search was worthless and you feel ashamed for even embarking on it. Only one way to find out what this game is all about. It's dead. It's somewhere strange. It wakes up. A dream. We play as this rusted, mysterious knight who awakens inside what looks like a bathroom with a spectral, glowing light in the corner. We aren't given so much as a name, let alone an identity to cling on to. We are an it, if the opening text is to be taken literally. We're given some opportunities to jostle around and sneak through this crevice and explore our location more intimately, a series of narrow concrete hallways just wide enough to walk through. Fractured rebar decorates the halls, strewn about like Christmas bulbs. We're cloaked in the dark, just barely illuminated by some lingering light coming from an unknown location. Everything looks rusty and crumbling and miserable, like a place that's been neglected for 1,000 years. These stone statues of giants huddle to themselves with tragicomic masks on, but you can't interact with them. It's important to note that there's no music here whatsoever, just the sounds of our armor clinking and the low static drone that provides our only company. That is until you start opening up the metal gates. We have to start lowering ourselves into the abyss, but we take no fall damage. Hallways and bridges peek out from the infinite darkness out of our reach. I don't know if I'm capable of explaining it, but this area just rubs me the wrong way. It makes me feel profoundly alone. Zero_Abyssal Somewhere is very aware of its video game status because it takes advantage of the fact that it's a video game. There's probably a pretty good chance you've heard of the Backrooms, right? Some kind of space between space where you can end up when you somehow leave our physical reality. Like if you fall through the floor like clipping out of bounds in a video game. Zero_Abyssal Somewhere is perhaps the very best representation of what it might look and feel like if you've no-clipped out of reality and entered somewhere not meant for human eyes, beating out most games that attempt to emulate that feeling, if not stealing the concept outright. Before the Backrooms, there was a concept called Blue Hell to refer to this phenomenon of 3D Grand Theft Auto games of falling through the floor. Everything would turn blue because you'd be seeing the skybox wrap around the entire map depending on the day-night cycle. It's not exclusive to GTA, but that is the franchise most associated with the phenomenon. But I did manage to blue hell myself in the Aqua Teen Hunger Force PS2 game, but I have a feeling that isn't the most particularly atmospheric example. There used to be an urban legend there was something like that that could happen in real life. It was called Michigan Blue Hell, if anyone is old enough to remember that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. None of this matters. Point is, the concept of leaving the physical world behind because of a bug in a video game has bled into reality. It's a very homeless feeling because, in a way, it sort of scrapes something inside of us, a part of ourselves that feels light years away from people you're right next to, feeling like everyone is static. People have always felt distant from each other, like you're sinking into the floor, and perhaps the blue hell is just the unintentional physical manifestation of such a feeling. When others are close, press R to take arms. I'm always saying this. Turns out there's actual combat in this game. It isn't quite just a walking simulator. The knight may not remember his name or purpose, but he remembers his blade. We encounter these wispy, shadowy figures that, try as we might, don't have much to say. So we've got to slash at them. They can attack and stagger us, but they're no match. Combat in this game is bare bones and frustratingly janky to an irritating degree. Hitting your target proves to be a great challenge because you fling yourself forward with every sword stroke, so you have to position yourself in the general direction of where you're going to be flung instead of actual slashing range. A successful hit will prevent you from being flung too far, but it's not like it means anything if you get hit. No health bar, and death kind of just puts you back to one of a few checkpoints, so combat is here mostly for immersion rather than a challenge, at least for now. You're a lonely knight without a name instead of a mysterious tower with weird shadowy enemies around every corner. I'm far from the first person to make the connection, but this game pulls a lot of early From Software catalog DNA here. I haven't experienced much of Kingsfield or Shadow Tower, but the little I have feels not only replicated, but understood and cherished. It's not exactly low poly, nor trying to be, but every step this nameless knight takes echoes in the Shadow Tower and the King's Field. I don't know. Almost everyone who's happened to play PS1 era From Software and this game have come to that conclusion. So the connective tissue is strong as it is blatant, despite the fact our perspective is third and not first. Some could also say that Baroque and other ominous titles potentially inspired this, and I could very easily believe that. Abyssal Somewhere wears its inspiration with pride, wears it like a rusted suit of armor even. There's a pedestrian road in the middle of this dungeon for some reason, which throws what little comfort we might have had with this concrete consistency vibe right out the window, making us doubt our surroundings even further. From below the gates emerged unstoppable giants, headless and of stone. They came on their own free will, yet no one really knows why. Those who could took the harpoon and waited. So, stone giants, possibly resembling the masked ones we've been passing, emerged from the gates, wherever that is, and anyone who was anyone was planning to hunt them with harpoons. We don't really know if these giants were hostile or not, but perhaps some more information shall come by. And by information, what I actually mean is... The stone is slippery. Waves roar below. We awake back in our starting chamber, except it's been flooded with white rainwater. The question of how it can rain is a lot less important than why it's raining. Why did the rain suddenly start pouring out when that, whatever it was, came rushing in? Was that a giant that the text spoke of? We've got to explore the dungeon some more, but we can at least trick ourselves into feeling the warmth of human connection with the torrential downpour of warm water. We might even be able to make friends with these suspended bodies that show up and gradually blot out the screen. 16 whispers whisper 16 words. They tell of holding all the blame, of their covered bodies, of being concealed in harsh concrete, even though they speak and weep and feel sorry and lonely. But underwater, it all seems like gibberish. Is it meant for someone else? We get to hear the musings of what I assumed to be one of these giants, or at least a creature that was aware of them. The 16 almost definitely refers to these giants, or perhaps those who stood against them. They took blame for something we don't know about quite yet, but what we do know is that they were locked away in some concrete dungeon, much like the one we're in now. They murmur, but you can't hear them underwater. Who all the murmuring is meant for is unknown, but it's likely it isn't for themselves. Voices, water, and rain all seem distant now. All this talk of giants, seeing what looks like an angel pass by, the water sounds awfully like a flood. Lots of biblical connections happening in the background here. Many are occluded by rust, and most are unreadable. One of the door frames you can read says, "Below was found, still intact, yet they were in fragments. They don't think another, the soothing presence of the gate and their watchfulness. They don't think or realize. They make this anxious." Some of the grammar is kind of confusing, so let me break it down. They, most likely the giants, were obscured down below, likely referring to this very dungeon, and they've been here for so long that they've fragmented physically and mentally, wishing they could see the gate. If we're running with biblical references, it could be the gates of heaven. They were described as watchful, so perhaps they could have been the Watchers. The Watchers are extra-canonical, meaning they don't come from the canonical Bible in most sects of Christianity, but rather the Book of Enoch, named after Enoch, one of the men from the line of Seth, described as being taken into heaven, rather than just dying like the rest of his lineage, which is a whole other can of worms, but don't worry about it. This was an antediluvian time, meaning it was before the flood of Noah. There's some debate if the Watchers appear in the Bible proper due to some confusing passages in the book of Daniel, but we're just going to focus on Enoch for now. The Watchers were described as angels of God who had begun to lead some humans astray, teaching them sorcery and other things that God did not care for, and eventually mating with human women to birth creatures called Nephilim, most often translated as giant. Nephilim were especially feared creatures, described as massive, terrifying warriors, often killing men and beasts alike, drinking their blood for amusement. So perhaps these stone giants are actually Enochian Nephilim, and part of the inscriptions carved onto gates are a retelling of how the Nephilim are locked away in this concrete maze forever. As described in the Book of Enoch, men cry out for God to help, and he sends out the 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. The angels get up to some adventures, but Gabriel is tasked with the destruction of the Nephilim, and I want to quote this passage directly because it's absolutely chilling. Enoch 10, verse 9, "And the Lord said to Gabriel, Proceed against the bastards, and the reprobates, and against the sons of the fornicators, and destroy the sons of the fornicators, and the sons of the watchers from amongst men, and send them out, and send them against one another, and let them destroy themselves in battle, for they will not have length of days." Destroy doesn't entirely mean kill in a biblical context, it's less killing them, and more so just disposing of them by any means necessary. And for 0_Abyssal Somewhere, this method is imprisonment in this concrete tower. With this theory, we can paint so many pictures of this concrete structure being hell, or at least beneath the earth, the rainwater as a symbolic, or perhaps literal, flood, like tears in the rain showering down this abandoned prison. These are the bodies of once watchers. Oh, god damn it, did I say all that just for them to explain it like 5 minutes later? God damn it. They have been put under jagged rocks so that they may not go further, for theirs is the nature of stone, and the nature of life is not so. Okay, so these are the Watchers here, not the Nephilim, if the distinction matters. Still, the humans taught them of life, and they felt it was such the hardship, and they felt compassion. Infrequently, the game will suddenly adopt fixed camera angles out of nowhere, and I think it's something of a missed opportunity to not have them featured more predominantly. I'm very biased to that era of fixed camera angle survival horror, but as fun as the visuals can be, I think lacking the control of the camera would have been a really snazzy choice for all the lonely walks between interactions with the environment was how I would have done it. It probably would have made combat more frustrating, but if the camera was only fixed during more specific intervals more frequently, that problem could have been avoided altogether. This is the land of Ka Djir Ra. It faced doom 6,000 years ago. Ironclad being, it has crossed to get to the underworld, and to heaven next. There, one may ask life itself, why you are the only one alive. Well, that was an illuminating bit of text. It looks like the full name of this Hueco Mundo looking place might be a bit obscured, but we can just call it Ka Djir Ra for now. It's some location that faced doom a very long time ago, perhaps as a result of the flood, or some kind of other fiery wrath from God himself. Ironclad being kind of sounds like us, since we're at some kind of night, and from now on, that's how I'll be referring to our protagonist. And if that's the case, then we're in the underworld, presumably hell, trying to get to heaven, like a twisted video game version of the Divine Comedy. We're given a question: why are we the only ones left alive? If we're to take this text literally, the ironclad being, us, is the only thing alive in heaven, hell, perhaps even on earth. And we're going through a Divine Comedy just to ask God why we were spared, which is profoundly reclusive. I really want you to imagine that. Being the last man standing on Earth. No family, no friends. Who knows if there's animals? You're all alone. And that's some of the most vexing and painful isolation you could possibly feel. Isolation not only from people, but from God. Absolutely no one loves you because there is no one who could. To have even one person around, even if they absolutely loathe you to your core, would be a comfort because it means that someone at least acknowledges you. It doesn't make you feel like you're shrinking and disintegrating into nothing, because to be hated is to be better than ignored. It's a kind of pain that nearly everyone has felt at least once in their lives, and it's here, manifested in this biblical nightmare. All of these ruins and things that once were are back here to haunt us. Like we've had a taste of companionship and love before now it's been ripped away from us. It's like a memoir of something we used to remember, just a faint glimmer of what could have been. Like a sweater of theirs you've never had the courage to throw away because sometimes you would just press it to your heart and trick yourself the residual heat could match their loving embrace you remember oh so tenderly. You'd lay there for hours. That kind of intimate heat would be a godsend as you navigate this freezing desert. It's also an intensely Christian sense of loneliness, feeling abandoned by God and the faithful and the angels, feeling that salvation and love are forever out of reach. It depends on the person if you interpret that as being spited and isn't your fault, or being overwhelmed with guilt and beside yourself with it. At least in my own personal experience, the latter is probably more common. I remember during some lower points in my life, I really struggled to take my typical walking route because one of my neighbors had this huge marble statue of the Virgin Mary right on the front lawn. She was depicted in deep prayer, but even with her gaze cast aside, I couldn't meet her eyes and did everything I could to avoid the statue. Despite being obviously inanimate, the grace of her likeness was intimidating, and I felt unworthy to walk near it. I kept my head down and tried to ignore it because I fear if I stared, something would happen. I don't know what that something would have been, but I wasn't ready to find out. I can only imagine what the Ironclad is feeling, walking alone for God knows how long, deprived of love or companionship or a place to belong, merely trudging along with a sword in hand, perhaps even forgetting why he does it in the first place. But he refuses to relent, either out of spite or a sense of duty. A beam of light splits the inky sky and some sword-wielding apparitions chase you around for a combat encounter, which is easily the game's clunkiest because of how wispy they are. Collision in general is not this game's strong suit, so you're going to be flinging yourself everywhere except where you need to be. And it doesn't help that the Ironclad gets thrown like 30 feet away every time he's hit. The game was so quiet and melancholy that normally I'd almost be upset with how feverish and intense this encounter is, but I'm all here for it. I loved this. It was really fun despite how obviously janky it was. Eventually, we do triumph, and this causes what I can describe as a devastating chain reaction. These are wastes. The angelic creature says as the Ironclad falls to his knees, "There are only remnants of ghosts here and beyond, and of beings of stone. What could anyone seek in these places?" Despite these words, despite the apparent futility of his actions, the Ironclad refuses to relent. Light begins to overwhelm the desert, and he gains the ability to glide, crossing great distances with his sword as more wispy creatures attack him. Reality breaks down as we get flashes of strange creatures as we keep hitting the arm of light, perhaps an angelic creature. When it takes enough hits, we get these flashes of modern architecture, which could mean the Earth was flooded either much later into human history, or there was a second flood, or it's more so a metaphor for the decay and ruin the world has been left in after the flood. Think about it. The only survivors of the biblical flood were Noah, his family, and the animals on the ark. Absolutely everyone else on the planet drowned from the heavenly water, flooding for 40 days and 40 nights. Imagine waves so high they toppled mountains, engulfing entire islands and countries with people on them. Millions, billions drowned. It's terrifying to imagine. It makes my hair stand on edge just describing it. That does beg the question on who exactly the Ironclad is. The treatment of the Watchers should inform us that Zero_Abyssal Somewhere probably isn't following an exactly accurate biblical narrative, but using its concept and themes to tell an original story. But I think it would make some sense if the Ironclad was a descendant of Noah in some regard. Either that, or he survived the flood when no one else did. Or he could be Noah, who knows really. Wouldn't be the first time Noah was the protagonist of a video game, believe me. The text describes the events of the flood while we play as a cloaked figure walking on a sketchy path, a picture of knights in the background haunting us the entire time. I can't really make it out if the Ironclad is there or not, but my mind is strongly sticking to the idea that he might have not just known who these people are, they could have been a part of his old group. I'm imagining he was part of a group of knights serving some kind of authority figure, but the Ironclad is the only one left. He could have been merely prideful to be part of such an esteemed group, or these knights could have been his found family. They're gone now. There is a distinguished it named ES. It walks. Is obviously ambiguous, and can refer to perhaps the Ironclad, or whatever the hell that is, or some other creature we might have seen. It's up in the air. ES is in all caps, so it's an acronym for something, and I know damn well it isn't this S, so what does that S stand for? I've got two theories, but one of them might be a bit of a stretch. Firstly, ES or S could relate to God in some way. You've probably heard of the Hebrew God having multiple names, right? Yahweh, El, etc. S could be another title or name for the God of the Bible, but I'm really interested in talking about the crazier answers I have. S could actually stand for id, as in the id from Freudian psychology, translated as the it. It's id's German word because Sigmund Freud was Austrian and naturally spoke German. To drastically oversimplify, the id is the unconscious desire and drive to survive. It's instinctual. The desire to eat, sexual desire to procreate, all of the feelings and expressions a baby would make when it's hungry before a personality is really formed. It's our bodily desires rather than our personal ones. which would mean that S surviving the flood could mean the survival of the basic instinct to survive, rather than a deep moral or mental reason to continue after the flood. The Ironclad has no dialogue and basically no forms of self-expression. He just moves because he does. Perhaps because that's all he knows. Anything I've said, or perhaps even the game has said about him wanting to find connection or someone else alive, could be arbitrary, and the Ironclad is just moving because he isn't thinking about it, which is thoroughly depressing, to be listlessly trudging on a journey to heaven, only to find nothing. The game ends here, but the story isn't over. We're told that next up is 000 Tower of No One, a sequel tease. We're booted back to the title screen, left to analyze what just happened as the pale white glare burrows deeper into our souls. There are a ton of different ways I can just repeat myself on how confusing and ambiguous this entire project is without digging into specifics, but you've watched the video up until this point, haven't you? Subscribe if you haven't already, by the way. I'm sure you have your own opinions on how everything went down, but damn, I don't think I've ever felt as lonesome playing a video game before. There's just a total lack of connection to your own identity, to anyone else, even to God. You're surrounded by stories of mass genocide and loss of the self, imprisonment, creatures abandoned in this brutalist concrete megastructure located in the spiritual realm by heaven and hell, standing here from the beginning of time and lording over all until its end. We're destined to head into a Tower of No One, which means quite a bit more if you check out No Noise's Tumblr page, because Tower of No One is actually referred to as Tower of Many there. And I'll read this excerpt from the page. The Tower of No One is an empty structure standing between two realms. Like stone, it's cold and silent. Those who built it, or those who inhabited it, are nowhere. The scraps barely manage to tell a bleak tale. Still, the tower stands in the way of a journey not known to be undertaken. What can you do to soothe it all? This tower, simultaneously and perhaps contradictingly called Tower of No One and Tower of Many, seems to symbolically be, or perhaps literally be, the Tower of Babel, a megastructure humanity built as a joint effort to arrogantly reach the heavens, which God thwarted by fracturing the languages between everyone, which eventually caused the creation of the world's many languages and left the tower forever incomplete, because no one can fully understand each other. The megastructure and divine aspect of Babel is strongly implied in this tower called Of Nobody, because nobody inhabits it anymore due to its abandonment, but also Of Many because humanity was once more unified under a single language prior. There are some screenshots we can absorb from No Noise's very quiet Twitter/X page, which is our clearest clue that Tower of No One is either the follow-up or fully released version of Abyssal Somewhere, but it is yet to come out, and there's no release date given. That's our story so far. The Ironclad seems to be on a search to reach heaven and ask God why he was spared or why he's the only one alive, and to do that, he needs to climb Babel. However, that tower can also represent Purgatorio, a mountain on Earth that Dante and Virgil climb in the Divine Comedy after climbing down Lucifer. It makes more sense when you realize that Lucifer is imprisoned in the center of the Earth, so climbing down him sort of flips you up back the opposite end of Italy, where Dante first entered hell, and now to Purgatory. Purgatory is supposed to represent the spiritual growth one would ideally find in life, and if not, I believe you were sentenced there if you weren't deemed a sinner, but still not worthy to be in God's presence in heaven. So it was filled with people working through their shortcomings until they can enter heaven. It's described as a mountain and not exactly a tower in the traditional sense, but it's laid out with specific terraces to represent the excommunicated, late repentance, and sinning not too grave enough to end up in hell. So symbolically, it's not that far off from being a tower. Regardless if it's Babel or Mount Purgatorio, the Ironclad has quite the spiritual journey ahead of him. But that's all we know for now. I might have been keeping some information from you. Actually, a lot of information. You see, Abyssal Somewhere isn't just an indie game with a sequel on the way. It's kind of a multimedia project too. Their Tumblr page shows the game proper, Tower of No One, but also 00_ a glimpse. Clicking it reveals that it's not a game, but a video. Specifically, a music video. How curious. Why don't we go check it out? The song sounds like some kind of demented Baroque track, like Vivaldi was experiencing some kind of Silent Hill manifestation during what should have been a normal performance of the Four Seasons. The sounds of birds chirping and squawking are mixed into contrast against the more menacing string instruments that wail at the same time, and we're given some more text to read. Long ago, the world felt elated under the rule of the angels, yet amongst the rulers, amongst the servants, a sin was brought into its place, and from it the earth suffered and was drowned. Some time ago, amidst the waging of war, the world was left alone, yet all were unaware of this. Many turned to stone, and the rest fell into disarray. Those who tried lost their sight, yet one fled outside and spelled the words. There was much to fear and to dread, and so fear overcame. They were so scared, they cried. Much of this information we either already know or could reasonably assume, but there are some important distinctions and clarifications here. The angels, presumably the Watchers, ruled over the men, which probably meant torturing them horribly and showing them all kinds of things God was not pleased about. Perhaps it was this sin that ultimately sealed our fate. But look at the text carefully. The world was apparently elated to be ruled by angels, and it seemed like there was one sin in particular so grievous that God decided to flood the earth. To once again drastically oversimplify, God flooded the earth because humanity's ability to spread evil had grown so vile that God felt it necessary to spare only Noah and his family, along with the animals, so that his brood may repopulate the earth. It's a little more complicated than saying one sin caused it, but the two candidates are either the original sin of Adam and Eve, or the unforgivable sin Jesus spoke of in many of the Gospels. Original sin isn't too hard to comprehend. It's when Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate fruit from the tree of knowledge that informed them of good and evil, which eventually led to being kicked out of Eden and the struggling nature of humanity. The unforgivable sin is much more complicated. It depends on which form of Christianity you're talking about, but the most common interpretation I've seen is that it's blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, usually characterized by complete rejection of God and hardening your heart against love, truth, and faith. I don't think that's in the atheist sense of denying God exists, but I think more so of the actively working against God and opposing everything he stands for, blasphemy, at least from what I understand. It's more commonly spoken of in the New Testament, but hearing how monstrous humanity had become before the flood in Genesis, it might not be hard to symbolize that as a single collective sin, which deemed the flood necessary. The next paragraph begins with "some time ago" rather than "long time ago," strongly implying it takes place after the first paragraph chronologically. There was some kind of nondescript war, perhaps a war that led to the fall of the Watchers, as being described as going eyeless and turning to stone. But there is a distinguished figure who fled to outside, whatever that means. Outside this conflict, this war, plane of existence, who knows? We might actually see this happen in the video as the photo zooms out to this pale, menacing figure standing in a field of grass with a white smudged figure beside him. The smudged figure essentially falls out of frame, of reality, and falls down, 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 which looks like rotated dashcam footage to convey how fast and hard he's falling, like a shooting star, the music turning into an ambient, droning track of pure menace. He lands in the darkness, but it seems to change him into the Ironclad. The music abandons all of its threatening aura in exchange for what sounds like a scrambled J-pop song, as the Ironclad writhes and flies up into the darkness towards a shadowy cloaked figure. Before his sword connects, we get a title, 000_ Tower of No One. An incredibly jarring change of tone and pace, but I'm not opposed to it whatsoever. This is our official teaser for the next upcoming game, but we've got two figures left to decipher. This shadowy cloaked figure could be the buddy we played as the very last minutes of Abyssal Somewhere, and I have honestly no clue what he could represent or who he is, but it's this guy I'm more interested in. I feel like a lot of people's first instinct is to say he's the devil, Satan, and I wouldn't blame them. Looks pretty threatening, and it's pretty common to dub any vaguely evil-looking authority figure as such, symbolically or literally, but I do have a different interpretation that's closer in line with the lore of the Watchers. I propose that this is Samyaza, the leader of the Watchers. He was the head honcho in charge of the Legion of 200 Watchers, and he really wanted to get together with human women. So he gathered into his troops and said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered to him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Which is a really funny way of putting it. How did this go for him? Not so well. Gabriel seemed to have caused a civil war between the Watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim, possibly the war talked about in this very video. The white smudge at his side very well could either be a Watcher or a Nephilim under his control. Perhaps the one that fell out of line avoided the fate of his brothers and sisters, and since it turns into the Ironclad, perhaps these knights were the Nephilim or the Watchers, and the Ironclad is the only one left who hasn't turned to stone or scattered to the wind, wandering the world in search of why he was spared from that fate. The search will take him to the Tower of Babel, and perhaps some confrontation with that shadowy creature, whomever it will be. Perhaps an angel or devil or some fractured aspect of God himself. Time will only tell, and that is truly all we know for now. Teasers for Tower of No One are few and far in between, and in the current year, we really don't know when this game will come out, if it will come out. But let's take a step back and go all the way back to the Abyss and recollect our thoughts and analyze the game over, knowing what we know now. Zero Abyssal Somewhere begins with our player character, whom I've dubbed the Ironclad. His origins are murky, but the best guess so far is that he's either a former Watcher, an angel of God who disobeyed and started to mate with human women and teach them sorcery and magic, which caused the loyal angels to sow the seeds of discord amongst them, resulting in imprisonment, being turned to stone, or scattered onto the wind, never to form again. Or a Nephilim, one of the Watcher's descendants renowned for strength and fearsomeness. Regardless, the Ironclad was seemingly spared from the Great Flood and infighting of his species, but that left him completely and utterly alone. His brothers and sisters are all dead, left abandoned by God, and he's searching for answers. He's making the journey down to Hell, and perhaps the Tower of Babel, or Mount Purgatorio, and all the way up to heaven to ask God a simple question. Why? Why was I spared? Why am I here when everyone else isn't? It's a complicated question that would haunt anyone. Why were you the only one spared? Imagine everyone you knew and loved, and even those you hated, gone over the course of a war and a flood, and you're the only one standing. The survivor's guilt alone would probably drive anyone to madness, but some part of the Ironclad holds on to hope, or perhaps spite, and refuses to despair. It's an isolation built on deprivation, knowing and yearning that the ability to talk and connect with people was taken from you. You're mourning not just at the loss of a person, but mourning the eventual loss of the memories they gave you. I have a watch that was gifted to me, well, more of a hand-me-down really, from someone I used to be close with, and we stopped seeing each other. The watch stopped ticking well over a year ago, and now we don't really have any contact. I didn't realize it when the watch had first stopped, but now I know I had to mourn not only the physical and emotional loss of this person, but also what little good memories I have of them, and I miss those memories just as much as I miss them. I can only imagine how amplified those feelings might feel for the Ironclad, who has no space on his wrist to hold a watch to begin with. Even if your interpretations are fundamentally different than mine, which I fully expect to happen, there's still a nearly unanimous opinion that Abyssal Somewhere is kissing cousins with some type of profundity and biblical themes, even if people don't agree on what they may be or how it's expressed. You're left in the dark. Pun not intended. Exploring these concrete halls feels weirdly relatable. It's the kind of game that makes you think about yourself just long enough to fill the echoing void with something other than silence, or at least it does for me. For such a brief experience, it makes me think and reflect on a lot of things. Creepypastas, urban legends, the Bible and faith, lack of human connection, old PlayStation games, indie games. There's a lot going on here, and it's had quite the effect on me. For as much as I like the game, it does have a few glaring issues. To no one's shock, the combat is easily the worst part. Clunky is understating it. It can feel borderline non-functional during the endgame segments. The momentum is out of control. It takes forever to wind up your only attack, and it can definitely feel arbitrary, but I'd rather have it than not. Even if there are a lot of problems, removing it would just make this a walking simulator. A great one, but a walking simulator nonetheless. It would lack tactile feel and engagement. The sword is really the only thing you have full control over. It inspired me to keep trudging, and despite the hopelessness of our situation. I'm not expecting the Ironclad to start flipping around like Ryu in Ninja Gaiden, but some greater sword slashing activities would be a welcome addition, even if it and the future foes are kept simple. Just saying, make the combat good is easier said than done, but a light and heavy attack and maybe some easy combos would make for a completely fair system as long as it's well made. It's clear the exploration is in focus here, and that could also use some polishing up. Perhaps some branching paths or more variety in locale, maybe some super basic platforming could be cool. Just throw in a couple curveballs, like maybe some branching paths, little deviations to make the experience just feel that much more captivating. As much as I enjoyed reading the text and giving those big biblical lore dumps, there's a lot of text that sometimes you just have to stop and read. The grammar isn't great. I'm not sure if English is the creator's first language, so I'll give him some slack on that, but it's a lot to kind of just swallow. Does kind of feel like you're being shoved down your throat a little bit. Some of these concepts definitely could have been woven into the visuals and the gameplay more rather than just plain word. It is a lot to engage with, especially the music video. I had to pause it multiple times just to write all this stuff down, then try and interpret it. I don't think it's the best way to convey information all the time. I'm glad it's there for additional details like reading the inscriptions, but it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. I think a future release should ideally have a little bit less than that. I'm fully aware this is a demo, and a free demo at that, which only lasts 30 minutes. But it leaves me wanting more because it was able to build such an exceptional atmosphere. I'm fully convinced with No Noise's ability, but we just haven't had the full release, if it's being worked on at all, still. But regardless on when, or even if Tower of No One comes out, and potentially even a third game where the Ironclad goes to heaven to have a loose parallel with the Divine Comedy, I'm glad to have experienced Abyssal somewhere. And I'm far from the only one. Countless people have also made videos on it, sung its praises and critiqued it on the itch.io page, and Backlogged, follow me on there by the way, really ate it up. It's definitely an underground project, even by indie game standards. But the few who have played it almost all agree it's something worth your time, because you may find something others have not. And when we get stuck inside of our own heads, we get kind of squirrely and project and externalize it differently. Each video on this game feels like a completely different project because it just has that effect on people, and it's beautiful. I really have no clue what No Noise has planned for the future, but whatever it may be, I'm not just looking forward to it, I'll be there day one, and I hope this video has convinced you much the same. Let's see each other soon, but until then, have a lovely rest of your day. Stay strange.